live here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. And
the Pisano, we are
Puddles. And the new International Public Radio. Yes, I had to double check that. And of course, 107.7 FM and 105.3 FM in New Orleans. In order to participate in the show this evening, please pop on over to YouTube, UFO Paranormal Radio channel, or any of the other avenues that we're on. So any of the network's Facebook group pages, we are broadcasting simultaneously. Twitch, I believe, BitTube. We're on at least 8 different venues. So,
SoundCloud,
anyway,
iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, all the
live.
big ones. Yeah.
It's live.
Oh no,
Not live.
I go
So,
back to
see
bed
what
now.
happens. No.
I go back to bed now.
So tonight we are welcoming back to the show Morgan Daimler. She will be discussing a new book that she has on one of the one of the Irish gods. And she's going to be getting into a little bit of Irish mythology. She's always a lot of fun. I would say she's like the queen of fairies. I just adore her. Zachman is in the house. Hello, Zachman. So you just pop on in there. So that is going to be a lot of fun. So Bubbles, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are you? Now I'm trying to wake up.
I'm okay.
Anyone who follows me knows I'm suffering from insomnia the last couple of weeks. But anyways, I caught an episode of my favorite show, which streams on a certain stream. I'm not going to give them their names out because we don't get any money from them, honestly. Yeah. So anyways, Supernatural. I love the show, right? Yeah. And Sam said a line today that I actually put into a meme and put it on our Facebook page and on Instagram. And I'd love it if you guys check it out and share it because it was so poignant. I loved it. He was in a shot and he says, in this line of work, death isn't always goodbye. And I was just I love that line. So if you want to share it up, guys, it's on our Facebook page and it's on Instagram, and follow us on Instagram, please. I'm working so hard on that. It's the hardest social media to get going.
Just works those little fingers to the bone and tries to put on some content.
I even spend time going through the stream, and I follow back, and I also participate in your posts as well. I do take time for that every day to go through it. So please do. Oh, never seen Supernatural, but I love the meme. Thank you, Zachman. You should watch the series because all 15 seasons are on a stream.
How good are you when you get 15 seasons?
Wow. You know, it's the only television show that did their pilot, ran their first season, was not signed for the second season, and the fans wrote enough letters that they actually brought them back to life for 15 seasons.
I know, they're awesome.
My gosh. And there's a big twist after season 5. There's a huge twist in how they do things, and it just gets better and better. So it's as close as you'll get to the truth with, comedy relief as you can without watching actual cases. But I love the show. Personally, I love the guys.
And
but,
pie.
Pardon? You like it. Oh, and pie. Cake isn't pie.
You have to watch the show to get it.
Cake isn't pie, Sammy. Yeah.
So yes.
I want pie.
I know.
It was even a thought.
I know.
That's like asking if I want pizza.
Pizza pie.
Right? So every time they ask me, what do you want for dinner? Pizza. I'm the one who's cooking. I don't know. But anyways.
Pizza pie. I know.
How was your day? You had a special day.
I did. I went and had lunch with my daughter, which was awesome. So she's alone, which is great. So she's allowed to mingle, with me.
With you, yes.
It was nice. Yeah, it was good. It was really nice. It was a nice little afternoon, and then came back here and started getting back into some research because, Joe, the slave driver, get in there and get the research done for Saturday. It's like, okay, don't hurt me. No, I'm kidding. I just do what I do.
That's too funny.
Has to be done. So anyway, yeah, it's like freaking really interesting. Like I can't even, I'm not even allowed to say the topic yet because he always posts it literally an hour before the
Yeah.
show or so. But it's going to be good.
Excellent.
The stuff I'm finding, I'm just like, wow, for real.
See, that's pretty amazing when you're impressed by it.
I know.
There's not much you don't know, so that's fascinating. Yeah, the Grey Zone is such a great show. I tune in as well because I learn so much. I love it.
It's always a learning experience because I spend about 20 hours researching for every show, and the stuff that I find, I was just like, wow, this is like amazing. And of course, I try to, I have a lot of like magazines that go way back, so I like to look into some of that stuff. But I also like to do some online stuff so people can go in and pick up where we left off, or if they want to elaborate on anything, they can go and find it easily, and then just take off with it and go into any direction that they want to go into.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of fun. I purposely do it that way just so people have access, to general research that they can go and find themselves. So, but anyway, so Nug Squad.
What's a Nug Squad?
I don't know, Danny. You have us at a loss.
Can you elaborate?
The Nug Squad. Are we talking supernatural? What am I missing?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know, man. I haven't seen the last 4 seasons. But whenever Joe is ready to bring Morgan on, there she is. Hey, Morgan, there you are.
Welcome to the show. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. I've been enjoying the talk of supernatural.
I know, right?
Isn't it fantastic? Like seriously, I'm one of those fanatics. I am one of those.
I've actually only seen a few episodes from the first season.
Wow.
I know.
It gets better. There's seasons with fairies too,
I know. Everyone always asks me what I think about that one fairy episode, and I'm like, I haven't seen it.
I didn't watch
it.
They touch on everything the first 4 seasons. No. They touch on every, like they call them monsters, but they touch on everything like jinn and different demons. And, as it gets further along, they get into the Watchers and into the, the Gregorians and stuff like that. So it's great because if you're not one to read, it's a great way of learning a few things historically and biblically along the way kind of thing, if you're not one who likes to read.
I use the GIF and the meme of the whole fight the fairies from Supernatural. So I think I'm obligated to watch it. I just have to find some time.
Definitely. I'm going to check in on you in a couple months, just saying.
I'll go up and just binge the whole thing is what I'll do. So
it's got to be one of the few shows other than like Michelle's Paranormal Survivor that I will watch beginning to end. Yeah, seriously. It's one of the few. I often fast forward. It's why it's called a PVR, so you can, right?
Yeah.
But I never do with that when I'm actually rewinding, going, what did he just say? Did he just say what I thought he said? And I'm like, oh my God, that is true though. So it's weird. It's funny how he incorporates, the writers incorporate actual fact. Well, we call it fact. Some people call it fiction or whatever, but it's really amazing.
I call it theory.
Absolutely. And I really enjoy it. And the comedic relief in it is just between the two.
The best part.
And the whole thing is they're best friends in real life, and it really resonates on screen. So it's great chemistry with all of that was a diamond, honestly. That was
I definitely have to find the time to watch it.
Absolutely. I use it to walk the treadmill, believe it or not, because it's exactly 43 minutes and I can't do more than that. It's just like, this works for me. But
everybody gets addicted. You'll stop writing books, Morgan. You're too busy catching up on 15 seasons.
I actually, I write a fair amount about fairies and urban fantasy. Like I've done a couple presentations at universities and things about that. And so I actually do try to watch whenever there's like TV shows or movies that I'm aware of that have fairies in them, because I try to kind of get a feel for sort of how popular culture and mass media are handling them. I don't know what it is with the supernatural. I haven't had the time, and then it just kept getting more and more seasons. And then I kept thinking, well, now I really don't have the time because now it's like really long.
And you can't just pick a show because there's an oncurring, story. There's more than one. So you can't really pick one show. You have to watch it from the beginning. In the beginning, you can see how really young the concept was. And then by the 4th season, you're like, holy crap. So anyways, it's really well written, but I think you would enjoy it. If you have the time, you catch an episode here and there, but let me warn you, you will end up addicted. And it's hard to stop, because I watched it when you had to wait a week, and then you had to wait 6 months. Now you can catch them all at once, and it's like, good Lord, that's a lot of binge watching. No one has time for that, but you do get caught up in it.
Well, I'll find time. That's too funny that you mentioned that, though. I was just telling my kids the other day. I had like one of those like old lady moments where I'm like, my kids don't know what it was like when you had to wait a week every day. Episode.
I have those every day. My daughter's 23, so yeah. You have no idea what it feels like to wait 6 months after a cliffhanger so long that when it comes on, you forget what happened. You have to go back and watch the repeats in order to remember what happened. So.
I think that was, they had asked a question about why the next episode had started with a recap of the one we just watched. And I'm like, because the last one we watched was the end of that season, and it was a cliffhanger. So now imagine this is happening 6 months later.
Yeah, sometimes 8. Just saying.
Yeah. My children were like, "What? Like, what does that mean?"
I know, especially right at your fingertips now. It's difficult. So I don't know. I don't have much time for television, so I choose wisely.
No, I do this because of the insomnia at night. So I do this at night, and it's in the background when I'm doing something. It's playing. I even have it on my iPad on a stand, playing on my desk while I'm doing something. I need the white noise. Being a medium, I just really need the noise in the background, or I'm easily distracted. But I'm easily distracted with that noise.
I was going to say, you're pretty much a squirrel regardless.
Yeah, it's really hard for me. It's really hard for me to shut down completely. If a voice gets in, I'm just like, oh God, But anyways, let's hear about you. I missed you the first time, and I was looking forward to seeing you and hearing about the fairies. And now I hear you're talking Irish mythology.
Oh yeah. I do a little bit of everything. So
tell us about that.
Sure. I was talking with Michelle in a message earlier. I was saying I just had a book come out. I write for a publisher in the UK, Moon Books, and they have a series called Pagan Portals, which they're designed to be like short introductory books. So usually about 100 pages, 90 to 100
pages. Oh, I like
pages.
that.
Yeah, it's just enough that you can kind of get into a topic without being really overwhelming about it. So I've written several books for the series, and most of them focus on, a few on fairies, but most of them focus on Irish mythology and deities. And I just had one come out a few weeks ago about the Irish god Lugh, who's one of the more sort of popular gods in the pantheon. And they're always really fun to do. You get to kind of do a deep dive into research on that particular one. I always learn something. So
So what made you decide, okay, I'm just gonna, because if you're getting into Druids and pagans, and like there's a lot of different gods per se, right? So why this particular, what's up with this dude?
Who knew? Okay, I'm very interested. I love stuff like that.
Yeah. And they probably like the book then. Well, I started writing for the series back in 2013, and the first book that I did for them on an Irish deity was about the Morrigan, who's a very, very popular, well-known sort of Irish goddess. And what got me doing it, honestly, was that even though there were some books already out about her, I thought it would be really helpful to have that basic introduction. A lot of times when you find a book about Irish gods, it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be this thick and like an academic dissertation, very kind of hard to get into, or very niche in its approach. Or you're going to find a book that covers a lot of different Irish gods, usually lumped in kind of with all the other Celtic language, culture gods, and you're going to get like a paragraph about each one. And there really was no medium. There was no in between. So I thought, well, it'd be really good to kind of have that out there, to offer that to people. And Lugh, even though he's really popular, surprisingly, there actually aren't really any books out there that just focus on him. And there's also, and this is true for a lot of the Irish gods, there can be a lot of misinformation that floats around. So I kind of thought, well, on the one hand, it'll be helpful because there's nothing like it out there. And on the other hand, it'll be helpful because I can kind of get to what we actually have in the mythology, as opposed to sort of the wilds of the internet. You can find a lot of interesting things.
Who is the god of what or who?
Lu is a god who is sort of multi-talented.
Okay,
so
I like that. Multi-talented,
very interesting.
It is. In a historic setting, he would probably have been called on relating to a couple different things. Kingship, by warriors, by different craftsmen, because he had a lot of associations. His sort of epithet, the thing they would call him after his name, was many skilled. So Lu the many skilled. And in the modern context, like for people who still, are pagans or witches today who connect to him, I've seen him still referenced as like a deity that you can call on for kind of any purpose, because he has that multifaceted aspect going on. And particularly for things relating to like modern technology, communication. Like if there's an Irish god of the internet, it would probably be Lu. So it's kind of his.
That is so funny.
Then.
Yeah.
Right. Like Flash in media.
Yeah. And he's
very cool.
He's an interesting one. A lot of people refer to him as a sun god. But to be fair, like he does have associations with the harvest and that kind of stuff. Probably more historically with lightning and storms than the sun. But there's one passage in one story where his arrival somewhere is referred to as like the sun rising in the west. Like he's so shining and awesome.
Yeah, I like that.
So a lot of people take that and kind of go with this, he's a sun god thing, which has been around for a couple hundred years now. It's not like a super new thing.
I'm going to kill Joe. Seriously. I'm going to kill Joe. Sorry. He likes to do that just to piss us off. But anyways, yeah.
I just go with the flow.
Us that close, right?
Yes. Somebody's playing with the program. So, oh my gosh.
I like the background behind everything, the trees. That's cool.
Thank you. It fits really well with Michelle's background. Well, her room, her whole house is like that. It just, when she's on her own, it just looks so amazing together.
Yeah. It fits great with tonight's discussion. So
it does.
That's cool. So
yes, it does. So who exactly were the Irish gods?
That is a great question. Super complicated topic, and really fun because it is one of those things that not everyone totally agrees on. But generally speaking, when we're talking about the Irish gods, we're talking about a group of deities, basically, that are referred to as the Tuatha De Danann. No one knows what Tuatha De Danann means.
Good.
I love Old and Middle Irish because
I like it.
there's a lot of stuff in Old and Middle Irish is the sort of precursor to modern Irish as a language, and it's a dead language. And there's certain things that we don't know exactly what they would have meant. A lot of people tend to translate it as people of Danu being the name of a goddess. But there's some other theories out there. It could mean something different. But we consider them the Irish gods because we have a lot of references in the older material to individual members of that group being called gods. So like Lu would be one example. The Morrigan, who I already mentioned, is another example. They're not the only gods on the scene.
I need this book. I need this book.
Kind of like, with some other cultures where you'll see you have like different groups of deities, of gods, of powerful beings. So we see that in Ireland too, like the way that the mythology works, which part of the reason I really love it is because I find it super fascinating and it's not your typical like what we would expect knowing like classical like Greek and Roman mythology. It's very different. So they don't have a creation story.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yep, Ireland has just existed forever as a perfect place.
Sam Lyle, right? It's always been there.
Yeah, according to Irish mythology, it is a perfect place that has always existed.
Right.
Forever. Wow. Yeah, there's actually a really, really funny thing in one of the older sort of original stories. It's called the Leva Cabala Éireann, the taking of Ireland, basically. That talks, it kind of blends in with some biblical mythology because that was the people writing it down were the monks, and they had to kind of frame it within their own system before they went off-roading into, Irish gods and battles and things. So they talk about the Great Flood, the whole Noah and the flood thing. And they're very clear that Ireland was the only place on Earth that wasn't underwater.
I love that. Just them, they're not underwater.
Nope. The island of Ireland was not underwater. Funny. I love it. I'm like,
I do too.
I found that research was much the same when I had to do St. Patrick and the snakes. It's like, we're on an island. It wasn't a thing.
It was Italian though.
It's such an amazing island that even the God of the Bible just couldn't do it. Everywhere else got flooded, not there. So yeah,
it was so high.
Yeah, it's a fun way to start.
It's a beautiful island.
You have to picture the monks that were writing this down, just being like everywhere except Ireland. Of course,
except Ireland. That's it. We love
that.
It.
That is so adorable.
So, I mean, where does the mythology stem from? I mean, the Druids, was it before the Druids? Was it, because I mean, they go back at least 2,000 years, probably before that, right?
Yeah, the Druids are kind of accepted to be sort of the priestly group or priestly caste of the Celtic language speaking cultures, and the Celts were a group of people originally in mainland Europe who spoke sort of related languages and kind of shared a culture, shared mythic motifs and artwork, art styles, that kind of thing. And they kind of migrated westward. I will say, as I'm getting into this, there is a theory that contradicts everything I'm saying, but it's sort of a more fringy academic theory. So I'm going with like what the bulk of books out there are going to tell you. Just putting it out there for everyone in the chat who's immediately going to jump in and be like,
everybody listening.
Yeah. But so these people kind of spread culturally into the West and eventually into, what we now would consider France. It was Gaul at the time, and the UK and Ireland. And as the culture was spreading, we kind of see this idea of shared God concepts. So Lugh is an example of that. We find Lugh in Ireland. We find him in a version of him, I should say, in Wales, under a slightly different name, but it's clearly etymologically related. We find him in Gaul, that basically was South France. Right. Again, slightly different name, but it's related, like the meaning of it. It's all connected. And there's a couple others as well. Brige is another one. Brigid. Trying to think of, now that I've said there's a couple others, of course, my mind is going.
There was like a
blank.
god and goddess for pretty much everything, right? Like wasn't there a goddess for horses? Memory serves me correctly, because I think I remember reading about that.
In Gaul, it was Epona. In Wales, it was, I believe, Rhiannon. I'm not 100% of my Welsh mythology, so again, don't throw stones at me in the chat.
I just like how it just travels around. But even when you say that Lugh, like the god of lightning, you think like Thor, or you think Zeus.
I know, right?
It just makes sense.
A lot of people debate whether Lugh is more like Thor or more like Odin.
Odin,
yeah.
I could see it being more Odin.
Yeah.
Or Lugh has a spear, like a famous spear is one of his weapons.
Right.
He's sort of this very wise, but he also has a bit of a temper, which is a very Thor kind of
Yes.
thing.
Oh, thank God for Marvel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Throwing that hammer
Now we
at
have
you.
you, because we need to continue and learn more. I really want this book. I need this in my collection.
So,
yeah, I mean, like I said, I was trying to get the information out there to help people get a better idea of who he is, because he can be a hard one to research. So hopefully it serves its purpose.
I find that, and maybe you find the same, paganism seems to be doing a resurgence with the younger generation. I mean, my mother is not younger generation, but she goes, I think I'm going to be a pagan. What?
What did you say that like last week?
No, yeah, a couple weeks ago, a month ago. I'm like, good for you. I think it's great.
It works, yeah. She's adorable.
But yeah, but I just find it making a resurgence, and people seem to have an interest, and they're veering away from traditional, religious beliefs, and it's like they want to go back to the origins and the roots, which would cover the mythology behind everything, and it goes like way back. And then you start to see all the similarities in how when the church came in and started amalgamating everything, but yet keeping things status quo, not changing it too much too quick, just kind of slowly. So
yeah, no, it's really fascinating to look at how as Christianity came in, that process you're talking about, where it sort of initially wasn't actually too confrontational with a lot of the older traditions and practices. It wasn't until it had gotten more of a foothold and was a lot stronger. Then it was kind of like, actually, we have a little bit of a problem with this holiday you have that involves going out in the woods and making babies.
Yeah, or just running around naked in the woods in a circle. And, yeah, it's not going to be a thing. Get the horns off your head and just gets a little hairy in some spots.
Keeps us working. Just saying.
But it definitely makes it a fascinating thing to study, because you can kind of watch that process of, and not quickly, over like hundreds of years, things kind of shifting. And like everyone, not that this is the time of year for it, but everyone likes to talk about Halloween and how that was originally a pagan holiday, which it was. And at some point one of the popes was like, maybe it's not the best idea to keep letting people who are now Christian like have these ceremonies that honor the dead and believe that dead people are coming back and wandering around. So why don't we just make a nice official church holiday at that same time?
It's the dark origins of all of the holidays, even like Easter and Christmas, and they're pretty dire. Like when the church started, I mean, they were a lot of fun when the pagans were doing it, and then the church kind of came along and said, no, Christmas, we're not even going to sing in church, we're going to just pray. And it's just like, you're going to sing, you're going to go into the streets and sing some glad tidings, and get a little shekel or something. It's just really, really strange the way they incorporate it, because they did make it seem so, but the pagans really, I mean, it was all about the earth. It was all about Samhain. It was all about everything, cycled around these different solstices.
Pagans definitely knew how to party. So
they did.
They still do.
They did.
A lot of people still do, yeah.
My mother's ulterior motive.
There you go.
Can we have wine?
Can we have a fire?
Yes. Fire and alcohol are.
I don't want to picture my mother running naked around
common.
a fire with some wine. I just don't. I'm just saying.
That brings me back to Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood, which is my ultimate favorite movie. But anyways,
I know.
Yeah, I love it. It's hilarious.
No, for sure. But no, so back to the mythology, and it kind of gets incorporated with Christianity and gets pulled apart, and
well, and that's actually an excellent excellent point. Yes, so we have this mythology that we know dates back. We have it in writing in the 9th century, and they estimate based on the language used in the earliest written accounts that it goes back even probably to the 5th or 7th century. So it's really, really old comparatively. But these gods, these beings, the Tuatha were so embedded in the culture, really, that even as things are very Christianized, even as we don't really have, it's not pagan Ireland anymore, you still see these beings. Like they can't get rid of them, basically. So, we see Lugh, for example, becomes this sort of folk hero in different places where he isn't necessarily acknowledged as a god anymore, but we still have all these folk stories that feature him. And the same basic premise as what we saw in the much older mythology, but now, he's not described as a god per se. He's more of what we would look at as maybe like a human heroic figure. But he's still there, he hasn't gone anywhere.
Right.
We see the same thing. There's a goddess called Anya in southwestern Ireland. Yeah, and she's one of the Tuatha. We have her in the older mythology. We have a lot of stories about her. And then she becomes a fairy queen. She becomes a queen of one of the fairy hills, Knock Anya, which literally is the hill of Anya. And I believe it's Tipperary. And, it just shows that like these were so important to people that when they were kind of told, well, you can't actually acknowledge pagan gods anymore because, that was like last millennia. We don't do that anymore. People were like, oh, okay. So she's not a god, but she's a fairy queen. And she's still there.
They find a way.
Yeah. And even to this day, at this point, I should say, in this day, it's being revived and really brought back, a lot of it and a lot of the older beliefs. But even 100 years ago, I should say, people still acknowledged her. The stories change a little bit, but the idea that she's there is still a big thing. And a lot of the Irish gods are very connected to specific locations. So the idea that if you go to these places, these are places that belong to them. So you could still encounter them. You'll still hear the stories about them. It's very embedded in the landscape, basically. And so they just survive. They survive into the 21st century.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Regarding, because I don't want to cut anyone off because there's a lag, right? So I'm very careful. No, because as you were speaking, I was thinking of Greek mythology and how, the prayers of the people kept them stronger and alive. What is the energy source that goes to in Irish mythology? Is it the same? Is it different?
I think the premise of it is different. The idea with the Tuatha, and again, this is getting into the older mythology, is that Ireland, as we've established, was never underwater. And eventually was settled by this initial sort of mythic race of people, and then they died out, and then this second mythic race of people came in, and they ended up being driven out and then scattered, and then their descendants end up coming back. The Tuatha are one of those groups. So we have this sort of series of people coming in and settling Ireland and then leaving for different reasons. And when the Tuatha come in, they fight this huge battle against the people who are already there. They win, they take over. Yay. They're ruling Ireland. And then after a certain amount of time, humans show up. And again, there's this big fight. And what eventually happens is the Tuatha are not exactly driven out, but they sort of lose the fight, as it were. And there's reasons why that happens. It's not just that the humans are better and they win. They sort of make a deal with the goddesses of sovereignty of Ireland. And the sovereignty goddesses are the ones who decide who is in charge, basically. And they're the ones who give that to the humans who've come in. But they can't really make the Tuatha leave. Instead, the agreement is the Tuatha will go into the earth, into the fairy hills. And so they get everything that's beneath the ground, and humans get everything that's above the ground.
Oh.
And so it goes on. And initially, the humans are like, well, this is great. We won. Yay for us. But what they find is that their cows won't give milk, their crops won't grow, so nothing is working out. And they go to one of the Irish gods, one of the ones who is one of the kings among the gods, and end up sort of making an agreement with him. And as long as humans continue to give the gods a portion of their crops and their milk and their harvest,
sounds like taxes.
It is. They refer to it as a tithe, but basically taxes. Then they will prosper. So it's sort of this idea of a reciprocal relationship. And over time, that idea kind of got transferred to the fairies. Right. So that, you'll find accounts from like the early 20th century of people saying, well, you have to give a portion of your crops to the good folk, to the fairies, because it's owed to them, it's their due. So even well into Christianity, even well into, the 20th century, there's still this idea that, you're giving a portion of what you have to the powers that are kind of running things.
Right.
Whether you call them gods or fairies or what have you.
Right.
So if that answers your question.
Absolutely. I was curious because, everybody, obviously every culture is going to be different. And I love how when you talk about the old mythology and the newer age mythology. It's almost like the Old Testament and the New Testament kind of thing. It's really neat. I find it extremely interesting.
Well, so do I. I find it fascinating.
When you're looking at the gods per se, in a lot of cultures, ancient civilizations, the gods were, some people will tell you they were extraterrestrial, coming in and showing people how to do things. Some people will tell you they were, watchers, fallen angels that come down here. Is there any of that, in Irish folklore, like the people from the stars became the gods, like many of our indigenous seem to feel here?
Okay.
Well, everywhere.
So I am not putting forth an opinion on this.
Go ahead, do it.
You've done this before.
But I will say, no, because I know you're going to laugh when I say this, but I will say that all that we have for the Irish myths, there's usually different versions. So there is no like one, this is the only version of this story in most cases. So the story of how the Irish gods kind of got to Ireland, we have a couple different versions of that. One of them, though, does say that they came in ships from the sky and landed on a mountain.
There you go.
As soon as you started talking, I'm like, actually.
We always find a way to bring the ETs in.
So that, speaking of funny things, for the record, when I talk about the monks writing down the mythology, I actually love that that's how it happened, because they were pretty good about just recording the beliefs and not adding in opinions. And when they added in opinions, it was like not subtle. So in the story where they're like, they came in ships from the sky and clouds and mist and landed on this mountain in Connaught, I believe. And then you have this monk, after he has said all this, who adds like, but of course we know that, Jesus Christ would not allow such a thing. So they must have just been humans who came in ships and then burned their ships.
Came back to tell them that.
It's almost like they're like covering their own butts a little. They're like,
but even if it was before Jesus Christ, how is that going to work?
Like when the bishop reads this, let me just be clear. Don't excommunicate me.
We did not flood, and there were no aliens. Okay.
I love that.
Okay.
So you run across that quite a bit, where you'll be going along and it's this very pagan, very like, clearly pagan mythology. And then you'll get this monk, scribe who has to insert like, but of course. But of course we know.
Which to me is so funny, because even the Bible has like stories of abductions.
Yeah.
like Enoch,
Yeah.
Ezekiel. Like there's all kinds of them, really. If you look, it's right there. So it's fascinating how they just try to change it. It's like, read your own Bible. Right there in the Old Testament.
Oh,
I look
absolutely.
at it as they're
Yeah.
like get out of excommunication free card. Like they're just going to put a couple lines in there, like, just so the bishop doesn't excommunicate me. Let me be clear.
Oh.
Like, of course.
Yes.
And then they'll get right back into all the pagan stuff.
Well,
so.
and I'm Roman Catholic. Don't send me emails, please. If you have an issue with what I'm about to say, email Joe Montaldo at the network. Anyways, I find it amusing that they put out all these rules, but yet they don't follow them. There's no role model per se in the entire Roman Catholic system. I mean, most cardinals, and forgive me because there's still some things in Roman Catholic that I do practice. There's cardinals that live outside of Rome with women and children and stuff like that when they retire, and I'm just like, really? But anyways, I just find it a bit
just a mad world, isn't it?
It's a highly contradictive world there, but anyways. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic, and I went to Catholic school, so it was just pounded into me.
Yes, can't talk about saying fairies are real when you're in Roman Catholic school. That's for darn sure. But what I find interesting, with fairies, we touched on this a little bit on the first show, was how humanity really looked at them back then, especially in Celtic times, like the Celts back in the day, Druids and pagans, and they would look to them as seers and advisors, magicians. Some say that that's where the Druids even sort of came from. Would I be correct in saying that?
I mean, there's a lot of different material out there, so I think it's a safe statement in the sense that there's definitely something out there that supports it. I mean, when we look at the Irish gods, and I think this is true for a lot of other cultures, although but my specialty is very focused. They're really kind of described a lot like humans in the way that they structure their society, sort of in the way that they live. Like the gods have their own druids. They have their own carpenters. They have their own healers. Like they have all of these things that we would then expect to see in the human society of like the Iron Age Ireland. So I definitely think there's an aspect of it that's sort of mirroring, whether it's because they actually are like that. I mean, I don't know that the myths are, literal recordings. But they definitely seem to serve as stories that humans are supposed to be able to relate to or understand. More so, maybe I should say, than what I know of the Greek and Roman stories. Because the gods do seem a little more, we're off in Olympus until we're bored and want to cause some trouble. I'm apologizing now to all people who are into Greek and Roman mythology out there.
Yes. I think that I mean, I love Irish mythology. I love like leprechauns and banshees and just there's just all kinds of just craziness, but I do know that they had a character, and I had to write this down because I'd only seen it one time and I went digging it up just for tonight. Dullahan, which is basically the Irish version of the Headless Horseman.
Oh, get out. Really?
I know.
Oh, wow.
I remember having to research that eons ago. I'm like, what's that Headless Horseman guy? Because, here in the West, we do have the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow and, and upstate, USA. I think it's in Pennsylvania or southern New York. I
Yes.
can't recall, but I'm thinking it they have their own version of this myth. Like they have very obscure, like they're all over the place with their myths. Don't they have one about a harp or something also?
Oh, in Irish myth, there's lots of harps.
Yes.
There's harps everywhere.
Like what? What do you mean?
Yes. Okay. So can you tell us about the harp one, just because Amelia? But I know
I'm
because
learning. I'm just sitting here taking notes. Seriously,
it seems to come up a lot. And I'm just like, why a harp?
I want to talk about the Doulahan though, because that's awesome.
Okay, let's talk about him first because he's very awesome.
And then we'll circle back around to the harps. Yeah, the Doulahan, in Older Irish, the name literally means like dark warrior. And there's a couple different layers of the folklore. The oldest folklore, he's basically like an omen of death. He would show up outside people's houses and usually as an indication that things were not going to go well for you after seeing him. And then we see it kind of in later folklore, it gets very elaborate. There's some stories that say he has a whip made of a human spine. I mean, it gets festive.
Oh, wow.
With the Doulahan. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize all of this. I just remember the headless horseman thing going, oh, here's a different mirror image of what we have here. So that's fascinating.
I've heard suggestions that probably the one in the US
this one
is based on the Irish.
Of course.
There's a lot of Irish immigration.
But it just shifts around so much.
And then so you get that.
It's a totally different thing, like Ichabod Crane and this, like it's a totally different story here. Considering when people do immigrate to this side of the world, they bring their belief system with them, hence Halloween, guys, how we got Halloween, right? So, I find that
there's a lot of Irish Halloween, because we definitely, it obviously Irish immigrants came over here with the holiday, and then we took it in the US and we were like, how can we make this as extra as possible?
Yeah, that's a good word.
Over the top parades and costumes and pumpkins, because pumpkins weren't a thing in Ireland, right?
No, it's turnips over there. Yeah,
turnips.
And then we exported our Halloween back over there. It's hard. It's difficult. But you can see why as soon as they saw pumpkins, they were like, carving that. Much easier.
Gonna make soup.
Although I will say though, carved turnips look a lot scarier.
Right.
There's just something about them, like they're very simple when you carve them, very simple faces, but they look really freaky.
Right.
When they're lit up. So,
they do. I guess growing up with the tradition of carving pumpkins for Halloween, carving a turnip just seems just a little mundane and a bit of a challenge. I was just
going to say you need a drill software.
Yeah.
I can't even cut. Like, how do you carve a turnip? Like,
if I remember correctly, because I do have friends who do this. I think they soften them first.
Okay, makes sense.
Not enough. Yeah, not enough where it ruins it, but like enough where it's a little easier to get into.
Yeah, maybe parboil it.
I would not want to. I would not want to carve just
that would be a bloody turnip. Yes, we have. I caught that. I was waiting for a moment. Hello. This is a cool place. What's happening tonight? What's the topic? Banana Boonie. Hi.
Everything is the topic. Everything about Irish mythology.
Irish mythology, fairies, folklore, gods.
Tomorrow could be like a third host, seriously.
Tomorrow night will be
Headless
UFOs.
Horsemen, apparently.
Yeah, we go one extreme.
Well, we talked a little bit about UFOs.
We did talk about the connection to the gods in general, and Irish gods included, and were they in fact from the stars to come down and emulate and teach, right? So basically, I think the Irish got taught extra bonus stuff, because they just thank you very much, Banana Booey. You're awesome too. Because they just seem to have a whole lot of freaking fun in Ireland.
Right?
Like
they're always laughing.
Leprechauns and harps. Harps is a thing.
Right, we're gonna get back to harps.
Harps.
The harp was like the main instrument in Ireland for a very long time. So like renowned musicians would play the harp. Poets would have harpers who would accompany them and play while they composed. So I think that's why we see so much with harps. It was just a really important instrument. If you go to Trinity College in Dublin and visit the hall with all the really awesome old books, I think they still have the Book of Kells on display, if I remember correctly. But they have a harp that was supposed to have belonged to, someone very famous historically. Just kind of demonstrate like how important harps were. Like it's not a sword. It's not like what we might expect in the U.S. It's his harp. It's a big deal. So we see in mythology that showing up, the idea that harpers were really important people. And there's a story, the Cathmoitura, where the Dagda, who's another of the Irish gods, has a harp and or a harper that is stolen, and there's this whole thing about they have to get it back. And the harp, when he plays it, it changes the seasons. So there's this sort of implication, that it has magic. This like, it has this like important power. Harps are very interesting.
Well, I find it even interesting with the symbolism, because I had a few years ago bought some Oddfellows chairs from a lodge somewhere, and one of the chairs had a harp, and I've not really seen that on other. I know I've not seen that on Oddfellows or Masonic chairs before, the harp. So I did find it to be really interesting. So I was curious as to, the symbolism, but obviously it's somewhat of a magical thing. So,
there's some really cool harp stories, not in Ireland. These are mostly, I think, in England, but and you'll hear song versions of this, where usually a young woman is murdered, and at some point somebody either finds the bones, or the way she's murdered is connected to a tree, and a harp is made, is the short version of this. And the harp is then played, and when it's played, instead of music, it's the girl's voice telling the story.
See? Who's Duncan had it right? Harps really freaked me out.
Now I know why. Yeah, I was reading that, and I'm like clowns, Duncan? And then when you said a woman's voice, I'm like, ugh.
But it's this idea of them just being innately magical instruments,
right?
So you make the harp, and it
gives her a voice, basically.
And in some of the versions, she's like a princess, and the harp is played in front of the king, and she kind of basically tells who murdered her.
Right.
In another version, like a miller's daughter, and her older sister is in love with this guy, courting this guy, but he loves the younger sister, so of course the older sister kills the younger sister.
Wow, Jesus, it's very dire and grim, isn't it?
Well, welcome to English folk songs. But then,
don't they have Brother Grimm?
Again, the harp. I was gonna say, if we're having competition, Germany would definitely win. Yeah, the Grimm original Grimm folk tales.
Yeah.
Wow.
Everything was dark, man. It wasn't all
fairy tales as well.
No, it's true. Very, very dark.
It's funny because most of the versions that we know today are actually the really sanitized Victorian nice versions. The originals were way worse.
But what's weird is the Victorians were notorious for dark things. They loved seances and picnicking in the cemeteries. They loved, crazy really like out there sort of gross Valentine's Day cards, and they they love to tell ghost stories at Christmas. Instead of a gift, you would come with a ghost story. Yet they tone down this complete, the grim tales. To me, be right up their alley, just as is.
Yep. Yeah, anything that related to children in the Victorian era, they really took anything super scary out of it, and tamed it down a lot. Fairies are one example of that, but definitely the fairy tales.
Yeah, they're not all so cute.
No, and I learned why. I did some research on this, why fairy tales were so horrific, and why they told ghost stories at Christmas was to make the children so frightened they wouldn't get out of bed.
That's right.
That's what it was about. And I'm like, wow, that must be the era of be seen and not heard.
I would never do that, but as a parent with 3 children, I can appreciate
the Victorian way of doing things.
I can appreciate.
Oh,
yeah, I was very lucky.
I would never do it.
I have one, and she loves to go to bed, so I was very lucky.
Yeah, that's insane.
Fight to keep her awake.
But it's funny, even fairies on average, people think of a fairy and they're like, oh, like Tinkerbell, who still had a nasty side to that little thing. Yeah. But it's funny because when you really get into fairy lore, some of them were like really hardcore nasty.
Oh yeah, definitely. Tinkerbell is a great example, though, of the way that fairies have kind of slowly been, I guess, domesticated, we would say, because Tinkerbell in the original book, in J.M. Barrie's books, I should say, and stories on Peter Pan, she was pretty mean. She didn't necessarily have a lot of power, but she was pretty vicious. She just kind of had to get other people to do certain things for her.
Sassy.
Even in the first Disney movie, the one that came out in, what was it, the 50s, I think, 50s or 60s, the Peter Pan movie. And she straight up tries to get Wendy murdered. Like,
which is true. That's true.
It's a lovely moment in a children's movie where she attempts to have some other, children.
Murder the heroine.
Yep. Shoot down the Wendy bird, because that's
true. That's true. That's true. So,
but then if you look at the recent incarnations of Tinkerbell, the more modern, in the last 10, 20, 30 years, she's completely different. She's super nice and helpful and
sassy.
Yeah,
and
sassy. I like her.
Sassy is a good word.
Yes, I like her. I have a hat that says sassy with Tinkerbell on it, just saying.
No, it's true.
But I don't think the modern Tinkerbell would murder anyone. I'm just saying.
No.
She's definitely left behind the murderous urges.
Well, the original Cinderella, they actually cut the foot off of the stepdaughter of the daughters so that they would try and fit the shoe. That's horrific. I'm just saying.
And the original ending to the original Cinderella, the stepmother, they force her to dance until she dies.
That's true. Right. And yes, I remember that.
Yep. So the older fairy tales took no prisoners. They were just like.
No, they were
proud of them.
They were grim indeed, the Brothers Grimm.
They should bring them back just for adults.
But they do have them in different, you can actually find them. The books are all out there, but they do the dark tales, the grim tales, I think they call them. So
what's funny is you'll find people who don't believe that those were the originals, who think that those are like the modern people are trying to make them super scary. It's like, no. No, this is legitimately what they had.
Those were the horror stories of my childhood.
The witch with Hansel and Gretel, she really ate them.
Put them in the oven.
Put them in the oven. She did. I know.
Yeah. Where were the fairies?
Where were the fairies?
Yeah. There had to be fairies. She was deep in a forest. There had to be fairies with Hansel and Gretel. I mean, the witch was deep in a forest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There had to be. We can add that. It'll fly.
A lot of fairies in the older fairy tales were not particularly nice either.
No.
Yeah, like
no. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. You do get the odd, the odd show that'll come out and you see them, in their true form. Some of them were adult size. They weren't these little tiny pixie thingies. They were like adult size, and they were pretty darn vindictive. If you really peed them off, it's just like they were spellcasters.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you did a stint on a book. Was it a book, or was it just something that you gave a lecture on? Fairy witchcraft. I'm pretty sure it's a book you have also.
Yeah, I've got a series.
A series. Okay.
I should know the answer to this. I think it's 3 books.
It's not your question.
I think it's 3 books now.
While we're all feeling grim, like maybe we're just taking to a different direction for a bit. So
that's okay. To be fair, like I love talking about old fairy tales, so we kind of accidentally sidestepped into a topic I really enjoy.
No,
good. Tell us more. What other fairy tale is like totally gruesome?
The original Sleeping Beauty was pretty hardcore.
Okay.
That one's definitely been, we'll just say Disney-fied. We'll make it a verb. Disney-fied a lot. I mean, I guess, yeah, the original version, whatever you want to call her, Aurora Briar Rose, the main character, when she is put into the sleep, everyone else abandons her basically in this castle, and a prince finds her and decides that an unconscious woman is just irresistible, and she gives birth to twins while still unconscious, and one of them crawls up and sucks on her finger and sucks out the piece of flax that is what caused her to be cursed, basically caused her to be in the sleep. So she wakes up to these twins in an abandoned castle because everyone has left. And eventually the prince comes back, and apparently she's kind of okay with the situation, but he doesn't want to bring her back to his home because his mother, the queen mother, is part ogre. And
sorry,
this is one of the oldest versions of Sleeping Beauty.
Wow.
And she finally in one version she finally convinces him, and in another version the mother figures out he's spending an awful lot of time like in this dark forest, and so eventually she and the twins are brought back, and the mother-in-law just can't resist her urges and orders the children to be cooked and served to her. And so the cook substitutes lambs. He does not kill the children, substitutes lambs and pretends to have done it. And then finally the queen is like, well, I also want you to kill Sleeping Beauty and serve her to me too. And the cook, kind of in a panic, ends up, I think he uses a young deer. Yeah. And eventually, because the prince has been out traveling, he comes back, finds out about all this, and the ogre mother ends up being killed. Then she gets pushed into a vat of boiling water. This is the oldest version of Sleeping Beauty.
I like that version. So she gets pushed into a vat. I like that.
Yeah. That very, very different from what we have today.
Well, obviously written by a man.
You can see why it's been altered. It's just insane.
Yep. I think that version is called Sun, Moon, and Talia. If anyone wants to look it up.
Wow.
Yeah,
that one I didn't know about.
Yeah, you can see why they've altered them. Children would be having nightmares.
I think some adults would be having nightmares because we're not used to that level of
fairy tale. No.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up with Brothers Grimm. Like that was my horror book when I was growing up. I used to love to freak myself out by reading the stories, but that one I didn't know about.
Yeah, I think that
goes even further back, doesn't it?
I think that predates Grimm. Yeah, Grimm, they have Briar Rose, if I remember correctly, which is a little more like the Sleeping Beauty we're familiar with. This one, I think, is 100 or 200 years earlier.
Wow.
Well, it would have to be that vulgar and you know, right?
Intense.
Archaic. So yeah.
Well, it's sort of like the story of Beowulf, how that was back into, I mean, they say the 1600s, but they believe maybe even further back, yet it's been brought back into modern times as a type of grim tale, and that thing is just crazy when you look get back into the original stuff. It's like, God, wasn't it people back then? Like to just, but mind you, times were grim. Times are really hard back then.
And a lot of what we have for like Beowulf or like the Tombo Cooley in Ireland, the story of Cuchulainn, which is like the big epic over there. A lot of those were really the equivalent of like the soap operas of their time period.
It's true.
Like that was why people wanted to hear that.
I could see that. That was a pretty convoluted story altogether.
Human beings love drama and horror. Like they live for it. I mean, it's classic. Somebody gets into a car accident and the highway slows down into a snail's pace. That whole have to watch kind of thing. Yeah. It's weird.
Everyone likes drama.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, these were stories that originally, the epic stories, would have been told like over the winter when people, weren't going out as much, were mostly kind of stuck in one room with everyone they were related to ever. And to pass and to pass the time, they would tell these epic tales, but they were supposed to be like really like we would call soap operas today, or I guess like binging Netflix.
Someone's gonna be talking about
supernatural on another level.
In 100 years, going, can you believe they thought that?
I don't know.
Probably.
I don't know.
Wow.
I mean, first time I ever saw Beowulf, I was thinking, this is an interesting story. Then I went digging, because that's what I do. I dig and I want to know more about it. And when you start getting into the real tales, like, geez, that's just like, just horrific.
What is it like? I don't know the real tale. And people, everybody listening, they didn't write that for Angelina Jolie, okay? But yeah, I've never looked at
She played the part so well.
I have to be honest.
I love her as an actress. I'm not going to lie.
My favorite version of that story is 13th Warrior. And I know a lot of people hate that movie.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
An amazing movie.
It has Antonio Banderas in it. Yeah.
Oh,
it is amazing.
Better.
It's based on the book by Michael Crichton, but they made it into a movie.
Yes.
And the movie, I think when it came out, got panned. Like the critics hated it, but it's sort of a cult classic. It is excellent movie. Not necessarily super accurate to the original Beowulf, but it's based on.
Yeah, it was good.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a really excellent movie. You definitely watch it if you can get a hold of it, for sure.
Angelina Jolie's the best Maleficent.
Let's slip into
That's
that
true.
fairy witchcraft topic a little bit, because when you think fairies, most people, the last thing you would think about is witchcraft.
Sure.
I mean, the real, when you know what a real fairy is like, I imagine they go hand in hand.
Yep. Fairy witchcraft. I mean, first of all, to be clear, it's a term that I use. There's other different versions. Usually they spell fairy differently that are floating around out there. Right. But the particular type that I'm talking about is people who are interested in practicing what we would call, I guess, neo-pagan witchcraft, but with a focus on fairies. And a lot of my study with it has been informed by early modern witchcraft, which is sort of what we think of when we think of witch trials, from like Scotland in particular. And when you actually dig into that material, you find that a lot of people who were accused of witchcraft, when the people accusing them were like, tell us about the demons that you work with, they were like, well, no, I have a connection to the fairies, to the good folk. And usually that didn't help them any. The people accused were like, no, it's all demons. You just don't know what you're talking about. But it turns out there's actually this very long, goes back at least 400, 500 years, connection between people who practice witchcraft and fairies, folkloric fairies.
Mm-hmm.
So, digging into that and kind of seeing how that worked with people, and of course the different folklore with fairies. To me, it just seemed like a natural thing to sort of combine if fairies are a main interest for a person, or something you kind of feel like you can't avoid.
They freak me out.
That's good. They should.
They freak me out. Yeah, they just freak me out.
They should. I mean, we have so much folklore. Like, we've talked a little throughout the whole show about fairies not being that Victorian idea of like the twee little cute winged children. Fairies and folklore, they can be helpful, but they can also be really dangerous. And we have a lot of stories about, fairies that cause people a lot of pain and suffering, basically. Or murder. Murder's also a fun thing that fairies will sometimes do in stories.
Why not?
Yeah. And there's such a diverse group in folklore. You have the ones that are very human looking, but not human. We have fairy horses, kelpies, for example, would be a type of fairy horse. Right. I love kelpies, by the way. Kelpies are some of my favorite fairy folklore.
I know. I love that whole folklore thing. As dire as it kind of sounds, they're pretty cool.
Yeah. Kelpies are definitely something I would never personally want to have an issue with, I guess we'll say, because in the stories they are pretty intense, but I just love the stories of them. And for everybody who's listening to this right now wondering what the heck a kelpie is, a kelpie in Scottish and also Irish, they have a different name in the Irish though, but it's a type of water horse, which is a sort of fairy who can look like a horse or can take on a human form. And they can be male or female. In the human form, they will come on land and usually end up kind of seducing someone. And eventually the person will notice, they have like water plants in their hair or some other sign kind of gives it away.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like that.
There's actually it used to be famous, I don't know if it still is, but there was a fairly famous song in Scotland called The Kelpie's Lullaby, or The Water Horse's Lullaby, which is based on the story of a Kelpie who had a human wife, and she had a child with him, and then one day, because apparently she was a little slow on the uptake, one day she figured out that he was a Kelpie and she left. She fled in terror and left the child behind. And so the Kelpie stayed where they had been living, raising this baby, waiting for her to come back. And the lullaby is supposed to be the song that he sung to the child, which is very cool. Now, the darker side to Kelpie folklore, before I make them sound too appealing here, in their horse form, they will appear usually either as a white horse or sometimes as a black horse, but a very attractive looking horse, very fine looking horse. And they'll sort of trick a person into riding them. And once you're on the Kelpie, there's a quality about it or a magic about it where you can't let go. You can't get down. And they will run into the nearest body of water and eat you, basically, tear you apart and eat you. And there's a fairly famous Scottish story of this, which involves children. It's been turned into a children's book.
That's right.
Yeah, where it's like 6 or 7 children end up on the back of this Kelpie. And the 7th one is the one who's kind of like, I think this is a little suspicious, because no matter how many children get on, there's always room for one more.
Right.
Which is not how horses usually work.
No.
And so
nightmares.
Yeah. So the last child in the modern storybook, he ends up saving all the other children. In the older version of the story, it does not work that way. He saves himself and all of the other children are taken into the lake and never seen again. So, and we have an Irish account similar where a man finds a Kelpie and manages to tie it to his plow because he needed a horse. And it's fine. It plows the field, not a problem. But then he decides, well, I'm going to ride it, even though everyone's like, don't do that. Bad idea. And as soon as he gets on, the horse runs into the lake. And there's a bunch of other Kelpies that are also in the lake, a bunch of other water horses. And that's the last we see of him.
That's the last.
So,
like I said, they're dire. But I do love the Kelpies. I do.
They're very fitting for the time that they were written, though. Like like Krampus and all these other horrific stories.
Krampus isn't horrific. Krampus is a festive holiday Krampus. Spirit.
Yeah, just that child over the head, throw him in a bag. Yeah, it's pretty horrific.
Yeah,
Speaking of stories made up by parents that I can completely appreciate their motivation. Yes. Krampus is the festive friend of Santa who shows up and takes away the naughty children, beating them with a broom and stuffing them in his sack.
That's true. That's Krampus. Yeah, he was St. Nicholas's compadre.
Yeah, and you know that there were some really aggravated parents around Christmas that were like, let me tell you a story.
That's right.
Oh, you want to be naughty and give me an attitude? You're going to end up in a basket.
That's right.
Wow.
And there's the Krampus stick right over there in the corner.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
I know.
And of course I am joking about the parents making up Krampus part.
Yeah,
we don't actually know. There's some theories that he was originally a pagan god that was kind of absorbed in. Yes, I prefer to think of it as
because he was I think he was a pagan god, and the church did what it does best, amalgamated it to be, because he was a pretty horrific looking dude, right? So it's like the shoe fits.
Kind of looks like that is the best holiday movie ever. That Krampus movie.
There we go.
You fit in so well. It's not funny.
This is a true story. I promise you, this is a true story. I was out the other day and I had stopped somewhere on an errand to pick something up, and the person who was working there, who I casually know because I shop there regularly, had asked me what my favorite Halloween movie was. We talked, and he asked me what my favorite Christmas movie was. And I told him Krampus, and he laughed for like 5 straight minutes. I'm like, no, it is the best Christmas movie ever made.
It was a good film. I mean, I was like a little creeped out by it. It was a great film, but my favorite Christmas movie is still Elf. Just saying. But
none such Krampus. So
you and my son would get along really well.
Oh my god! But I can watch that over and over. But like, you can't pick a favorite scene. That's probably how you feel about Krampus. Krampus creeps me out because I love Christmas, so Krampus kind of like poops on it, right?
See, I must just be like a pagan at heart, because that's all the stuff that I fall for all the time.
Yeah, Krampus is just ensuring that people have the adequate Christmas spirit.
Right.
If you
that's
don't,
a good way of
there's consequences.
Insurance. I like that.
If that whole family had been nicer.
There you go. They'd still be alive.
they would not have been Krampus
or run over by a truck or slashed like Freddy Krueger or.
No.
I'm like, wow, red snow for Christmas. How apropos.
I think that might actually be a real movie. Pretty sure there's a movie named that.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Krampus. Yeah, the actual film. That's what I saw. That's why I said Krampus is creepy.
See, he's got those big elf ears too. Just saying, those pointy.
Yep.
Yeah, they don't show him till the end, I believe, in that film. You kind of just get
just makes you wonder. Does he fall into that hole? Is he a fairy deity?
It's interesting too, because in the movie he has elves that are assisting him.
Okay, see right there.
And they're shown wearing these masks, and that actually is a thing in Germany, not with Krampus so much, but with a goddess also connected to some of this named Perkta, or Bertha.
Yes.
And she has these elves, and there's two kinds.
Yes.
There's the Shona Bergton. I'm trying to remember what the other ones are called. Basically the pleasant elves,
The cute elves
and the ugly elves. And it was actually a fairly accurate depiction of how those are supposed to be in folklore. There's the ones that reward you, and there's the ones that punish you. So
right. So when you're like, I'll use Scotland as an example because I never made it as far as Ireland. I've done England and I've done Scotland, but I spent time on the Isle of Skye where there was the Fairy King's Grotto, and there was the fairy circles, and right. And they say, don't go up into the grotto because that's where the Fairy King is, and he's not going to be really happy if you get up there. So I look at my son, I'm like, get up there and see if there's anything in it.
I knew that was coming.
Okay. He's in his 20s. Okay, I'll do it. Take one for the team. Get up there. I just have to see, because there's really nothing in there. It's like, okay.
Oh my God. Poor kid.
That's cool. Well,
mean parents, get up into the freaking Elf King or Fairy King Grotto.
Go see what happens. When I was in Iceland, we're getting all the seasons in when we discuss
Here we are.
Speaking of kind of Christmas, Yule celebrations.
Yes.
In Iceland, they have Gryla, who's an ogress, who, again, different sorts of mythology with her, and the Yule lads, who are her children.
The Yule lads. So they're hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah, and the Yule lads actually are like, I'm not going to remember all their individual names, but their names are pretty funny. It's all like Candle Snuffer, Harasser, like stuff like
the ones that take the sausages, or is that a whole other one?
Yep. No, one of them.
Sausage stealer.
Sausage stealer, yeah.
Oh, that just made me the old lady laugh. You know where you're wheezing.
And the idea with the Yule lads is the 13 days of Yule, one comes down each day, and they kind of cause like this sort of generic mischief sort of stuff. But there's a place in Iceland that actually is supposed to be their home. It's now like a national park. It's a very cool place. And I went there when I was in Iceland, and it definitely is an interesting place. And there's one spot there. It's a natural cave, and it's called Gryla's Cave, and it's supposed to be her home. And that was one of the few places when I was there I was like, nope, I'm not going in there.
Why not?
Michelle would go in a heartbeat.
I know.
Apparently, she's
the only reason I didn't do the king.
She goes anywhere.
I don't think my butt could fit through that little. So they
that's fair. But that's fair. Yeah, a bunch of people I was with went in. I don't know. I got that kind of feeling where I'm like, I think I'll stay out here.
Trust the gut. So like all these past generations of all these historical and these stories that go for hundreds of years, and what do we give the future generation but Elf on the Shelf? Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I
have to admit. So I love dark fairy tales, as we've established. I love fairy folklore, which is often like super dark and disturbing. Elf on the Shelf creeps me right out. I won't allow them in my house.
Thank you.
My daughter has a bunch of them, and she will purposely put them in places where I'm going to walk into them. I'm like, really? Like, what are you doing to me? You're going to give me a heart attack. Like, seriously. But she'll just put him like anywhere, and she's got different ones. I'm like, I'm going to start buying her clothes for these things. But it was a great marketing concept, right? Like,
they have movies now.
Oh yeah.
They have movies. They have a little fox that goes with it.
He's just too happy and jolly.
He's not. He's creepy AF. They show him in a box. My favorite one.
He should be in a box.
My favorite one.
6 feet under. Just
yes, but you're gonna love this one. They have him hanging by his ankles from a hood fan over a stove, a gas flame, and they have G.I. Joe and Barbies pointing guns at him with army figures. That's my favorite meme.
Nice. Yeah, I've seen a really funny one where he's like tied to a spit over a fire, and it's like the Abominable Snowman from that claymation movie.
I've also seen him on a cheese grater with his pants down.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that have no love for the elf on the shelf.
No.
He spies on you, and he moves on his own.
You're teaching your kids, and my niece is there in the audience, Jessica. You're teaching your kids it's okay to be creeped up and watched. Like, come on.
No, it's not okay. And I'll admit, like I read a story when I was fairly young about dolls that would move at night, and I think if I remember correctly, because I was really young when I read this, and like killed someone. I don't know. And ever since then, the idea of any doll that like moves on its own, I'm not okay with that.
I think Elf on the Shelf is a modern version of Chucky. Like, I'm just waiting for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I like Zach Man. There's just throw concrete shoes on him and dump him in down lake. Yeah, I'm down for that.
I'm with you, Zach. That is so funny. Like,
I'm gonna stick with the meme. I'm gonna stick with the meme that shows Legolas from Lord of the Rings and says, "This is the only elf I want on my shelf."
Yes, I'm down for that.
Yeah,
I'm down for that.
Love that.
Yep. But you see, that's a whole other type of elf.
And hobbits, are they real? Where did that story go?
No, because it really shows different elfin communities in Lord of the Rings. I love how they did that, and how some of them were just real pompous, some of them were just really kind, wanted to help, but others, you know what I mean? There's a whole array of personalities and hierarchies,
kind of like humans.
Tolkien based his elves on basically Norse and Celtic mythology. So, yeah, they're a little nicer in general than the ones we find in the actual mythology, but the same concept, very human looking. There's a whole debate about the pointed ears thing, but very human looking, but more wiser, more powerful. Yeah, you don't see pointed ears in mythology or folklore. It's something that started in artwork. I'm trying to remember when. I say late 18th, maybe early 19th century. And it was just a way to let someone know when they were looking at art that this was supposed to be a fairy or an elf because they looked human. And you want to make it clear this isn't human, this is something magical. And the pointed ears specifically were actually connecting them to demons because demons were shown with very animal-like ears. Yes. And then it got really popular, and then Tolkien never actually described his elves having pointed ears. There's like one sort of outtake kind of description where he mentions leaf-shaped, and people just kind of took that and ran with it.
I understood. Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll see, it's funny if you look at some of like the early 20th century, sort of the late Victorian era artwork with elves and fairies, you'll see elves with pointed ears and fairies with wings.
Yeah.
But the fairies will have round ears.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. They're not shape-shifting little imps then.
That they really are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these days in the modern 21st century,
they could be shapeshifters.
Fairy world. Yeah, if they want to have pointed ears, I'm sure they do have pointed ears. So,
it really is interesting because, you read some folklore that talks about how they were keepers of knowledge, and how they had vast libraries and, things of that nature. They're just very wise. But then you just get other stuff and it's just like, they're just kept to themselves and they really didn't like people.
I mean, both of those things can be true.
Yeah, who knows, right?
You can be very wise and knowledgeable and super antisocial,
Right.
So,
yeah. So do you think they exist today? And I'll let you answer before I tell you why I asked the question.
I think that there are still stories today of people encountering them. Yes. I think that our connection to the folklore is different.
Right.
So we don't have people as much, and particularly in the United States, we don't have people for the most part who are growing up
Right.
immersed in these beliefs and these stories. One of the reasons that, like I said at the very beginning, that I kind of keep in touch with the modern sort of fiction idea of fairies and mass media idea of fairies is because that's where a lot of people are getting their information from.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what people in Ireland, for example, or Scotland would believe today about fairies, but they've watched a lot of Carnival Row, for example,
Right.
or
Yes, that's right. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Right, or they've read Jim Butcher because he has fairies, or Holly Black, and they're incorporating that as if it was meant to be folklore, folk belief, which it's not, and there's reasons that it's problematic when you do that. But I do still think people have these experiences and these encounters, and that you could definitely argue, as long as people are experiencing them, that they're there. And also, of course, it's not just a Western European thing. Like, we find fairy-like beings everywhere. All different cultures have very similar concepts. They use different names for them, but
well, you have the gnomes in Iceland who literally rerouted a highway because they just, it was in the newspapers. I'm like, that's bloody outrageous, so their thing.
That's the only thing that freaks Michelle out.
I don't like them.
No,
it's not freaking me out. There's something about gnomes. I just think they're sneaky.
They're all over people's lawns all summer.
Yeah, and I want to just kick one off when I see it. I don't know. But
in Iceland, the Alfar, we would call them elves in English, or the Huldafolk, the hidden folk, are a really big deal. There's actually the last Will Ferrell movie, if you want like a really amusing take on elves in Iceland. Very tongue-in-cheek, but it was funny. I think it was Eurovision Song Contest, the story of Fire Saga. It's a very long title for the movie, so I might be messing some of that up.
Okay.
But there are some elf cameos, we'll just say.
Wow.
In that movie. And it actually is truer to the folklore, I think, than you would expect from a Will Ferrell movie. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
I'll throw that out there.
What's the strangest place that anyone's ever reported seeing a fairy? And I will tell you why I'm asking you this.
Burlington, Ontario. There's apparently fairy trees. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, wow.
I mean, around the world, you're going to find them pretty much everywhere. But I will say there is folklore. I heard this from Richard Firth Green in a presentation he did at a conference. He has an excellent book called Elf Queens and Holy Friars, talking specifically about English fairy lore. But he was talking in this presentation about beliefs in, I believe, the northern part of France. And they actually had a protective practice involving eating bread while they were on the toilet. The medieval equivalent of the toilet.
Is just gross right there. Yeah.
Because it was a protection against fairies. And the implication there is that when you were using the toilet in the medieval times, you were at risk of fairy attack. I can't say this with your face.
Really?
So I remember thinking when he said this, that would be the strangest place. Yeah, that would be the strangest place I've ever heard anyone talk about potential fairy attacks.
Yeah, I was curious because one time when I was at an airport here where they have commercial, not tourist flights, what's it called? Cargo planes going in and out. And the Warplane Museum is nearby. And I went there with a mentor, and I told Michelle I was out there doing some practice and I was learning about jinn and stuff like that. And I thought I saw something from my peripheral, and he just like shielded us right away because apparently he's had interaction with it. And I don't know if I really saw. It's one of those things like, did I see that, or did I? Now I know how when people see a ghost, how they feel. Like for me, it's normal, but when I saw this little thing in what looked like a red outfit to me, and when he was come by my peripheral, and I went like, and it was gone. It really did. It did.
People would send me photos of them.
Wow.
Just these little sparky things.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, it could be anything. And then I remember being on a tour one night, a ghost tour of all things, and there was this tree, and it lit up. Like, this was without taking a photograph, but someone did capture a photo of it. And it looked like a bunch of little Christmas lights. And it's the middle of the summer. And I'm like, ooh, fireflies. Logical brain. Run over to the tree. Just try to see. Because my mind goes, no, I got to see what the hell this is. Yeah. Because even when you get fireflies, you'll only get maybe a few little ones. And they spark on and off. Yeah. This whole tree, this lit up. And it was like that for probably about 30, 40 seconds. So it was like substantial enough for somebody to pull out a camera, take a photo. Nice. And then everything just went gone. And I'm like looking at this tree.
I love that. That's amazing that they caught it.
It was like a giant shrub is what it was. It wasn't so much a tree. It was just like a big cedar shrub, probably about 6 feet high, probably 4 feet around. Like it was, so what's your take on that? Was that fairy folk? Is that pixies? Is that?
So two different answers here. For the airport thing, there we go. For the airport thing, first of all, there actually is a strong association with gremlins, not the like kitschy 1980s movie Gremlins, but
okay.
If you've ever seen the episode of The Twilight Zone featuring gremlins, that's what we're talking about. Yep.
Yes.
They're a type of fairy being who we first hear stories about during World War I and then World War II. And they were associated, because I was thinking this as soon as you mentioned the warplane museum being close by. They were associated with causing mechanical issues with the planes. And so that's sort of where their folklore is connected to, specifically with airplanes, but they've kind of expanded in folklore to any sort of mechanical problem can be blamed on gremlins. Wow. So that's my first thought when you're talking about seeing things in an airport of that nature. The lights in the trees, I've never seen anything myself specifically like that. Haven't heard anything exactly like that, but the idea of fairies appearing in lights or with lights, we have a lot of folklore about that. Lights that move in the trees, people that would look at it and think that it was, this is places that don't have fireflies and kind of prior to more modern technology would think that it was like a group of people carrying torches or candles. So this idea of these sort of moving small yellowish lights, we do have quite a few accounts of that. Jumping back to our UFO discussion a while ago, that's one of the reasons that I do tend to see a bit of a connection sometimes between stories about aliens or UFOs and stories about fairies, is because we do see this kind of crossover sometimes. Like you'll see UFOs sometimes described as lights moving in the trees, or low to the ground. They're not always up in the sky. And we see the same thing in some fairy folklore, this idea of the lights. So, and they would be things that you would see with your naked eye. You wouldn't need a camera or a video to see it.
Right.
It's something you would see. Well, that's to kind of differentiate from like orbs and ghost things.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much what this was. Only the whole tree, like I said, it looked like little white Christmas lights. Wow. In the middle of the summer, all of a sudden, it just, you're like,
that's exciting.
Okay. It was
That's really interesting.
That tree has since been cut down. Within a year or two, that tree was cut down. And a lot of bigger trees are also cut down. But I think after that, people just started going to it, and the owner's just like, enough is enough already, and they just cut it down. And but there is supposed to be, like all kinds of them throughout like the city.
Be interesting to see if the person who cut it down had any repercussions.
I was just going to ask you that.
The whole property had issues. I mean, there was a double murder on it or something like that, and it was just, but this was like, totally random. And I know somebody, there were a couple of people that got photos of it. I'll have to see if someone sent it to me. That's going back in the Wayback Machine for sure. And people do will send me photos, but it's questionable because you're just seeing these little sparks, and they're taking with film cameras, like they're not taken with digital cameras. But I'm looking at a bright sunny day in a harbor, and I'm like, could be a reflection off the water, could be this the camera lens, it could be, but this person's like, no, I'm telling you, I see these fairies all the time. It's just okay, well,
I will admit I am the first person and probably the loudest person who's always screaming pareidolia when people show pictures of, like, I was walking on a trail and I took this picture and there's this little blue light, and I'm like, it's a lens flare. Like, I'm sorry.
It's true. It is really difficult, to tell people when they think they have something really amazing. But I always say process of elimination. Take the exact same picture 2 or 3 times. If it's the same, it's logical. If it's changed and you've not, like hold down your shutter or just whatever.
Yeah.
Don't move, don't do anything. And if it's changed, then that's potentially possible that you captured something. But if it's the exact same thing and the flare is still there, or the glare is there, or the object in question is still the same, then chances are it's something that can easily be explained away.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I 100% believe in these beings. I believe they exist. I believe in ghosts. I believe in fairies. All that fun stuff.
Do you think they're ETs?
I'm a little more agnostic on the subject of aliens.
Right.
I don't disbelieve in them, but I don't believe in them in the same way that I believe in, like, ghosts and fairies, which I realize seems like a very arbitrary distinction.
Okay, so shall we say interdimensional beings, maybe?
There's a strong argument that fairies themselves are probably interdimensional or extra-dimensional beings. And I do tend to see a crossover between, as I said, fairies and aliens. Particularly in the stories relating to them. So, but as to actual extraterrestrial aliens, I'm agnostic. We'll just say that. I don't disbelieve, but I don't actively believe. I'm kind of in the middle.
It's a process to get to that point because of what we've been, what we learned and how we've been exposed to it through Hollywood and the media and the government. So it is a process.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about ghosts, for example, I've had experiences in my life that I believe are encounters with ghosts, or people that I know and trust have had experiences that I believe are encounters with ghosts based on what they've said. The same thing with fairies. I haven't ever met an alien. I haven't personally seen a UFO. I do have people I trust that say they've seen UFOs. So I believe there's things up in the sky that are unidentified flying objects. I do believe in those. What they are exactly, I don't know.
And Tom Rivers is a friend of the show's. He writes, "I'm a believer in UFOs, but struggle with the idea of fairies." That's fair.
Yeah. Well, and I find it entertaining, I should say. I'm sure other people don't necessarily, but there's an interesting sort of dichotomy in the two communities where you have ufologists and people who are very into aliens and UFOs, and then you have people who are very into fairies. And I will admit that I tend to fall into this camp myself a bit, but people who are very into fairies will tend to say everything is fairies. So, you give me UFO stuff and I'll explain why that could be fairies. Whereas people who are into UFOs and aliens, you give them fairy stuff and they'll be like, well, this was just aliens before people knew what that was. This is the context they understood it in.
Yeah. They also believe angels are ETs as well. It's a fine line. I could see the similarities on why people believe what they believe.
Yeah, I think we always. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we always understand things within the context that we have to work with. So if you're raised with fairy beliefs, you know, that's going to be the direction you go in.
Our producer wrote, "It's a gray fairy."
Yeah. I believe if you're talking interdimensional, you know, anything is possible because, you know, you haven't explored all of that.
Yeah. And we could all be wrong. All of our ideas.
But isn't it great just bouncing around all the possibilities? I love that. I love it. I just think it's just, you know, you don't want to live in such a world that's just so humdrum. You know, you want to just believe in these things. And you see videos out there where you really need to wonder, you know, like there was just one video I saw and it was just this freaking gnome crossing a street and it was just doing one of these things. I'm like, ooh, freaking hell, it's sidestepping and everything, you know. I'm funny with them because they're just a little hostile.
This is a woman who took a nap in the haunted forest in Romania.
It doesn't frighten me. It doesn't frighten me. It's not that kind of weird. It's just gnomes are just known for, you know, like they'll serve, right? They'll do all kinds of things, right? But like you just have to be like, if you make them a promise, you better stick to it, right? Or they'll just torment your ass. It's kind of like that, right?
That's a very fairy thing.
Well, you know, there's folklore where people move onto properties with gnomes and they get really hostile.
Holy crap.
I know. So here's this one in freaking Chile doing this thing, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. It's like just having a bad luck charm in your back pocket all the time. So it's kind of like that, you know, but I don't know.
Joe says they use gnomes for target practice in Louisiana.
See, there you go.
The garden gnomes. The garden gnomes.
Yeah. So I don't know. So before we sign off, why don't you tell everybody about your new book and what you have coming up and how people can find you?
Sure. Well, you can find me all over social media, sadly. I'm almost always, I should say, under just Morgan Daimler. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Like I said, sadly, everywhere, social media. Yeah. It's, you know, every time you think you're done, then you find yourself somewhere else. I just recently got on TikTok. I totally blame my 17-year-old for that.
Okay, I can tell you right now, I had to walk away because I was losing 4 to 5 hours of my life at a time, thinking it was 10 minutes.
Then she says, I think you might have had missing time. Yeah. And freaking TikTok is where it's been.
I had to close my account because I had people message me going, why did you take me off TikTok? I go, no, I took myself off. I didn't take you off.
She needed an intervention. So anyway, and your books? Your books?
Yep, I have like I said, my last book that came out was Pagan Portals Lou. I have a book I just finished for that same publisher about the Norse pantheon. That should be out, I believe, April of next year. I'm working on my next novel. I do have a 9-book fiction series that I do. Urban fantasy, paranormal romance, elves, all that good stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. I write fiction for fun because nonfiction's kind of my job. So
yeah,
got to do something.
Makes sense. It makes sense. Flip-flop back and forth. And do you have anything coming up? Any events?
Yes. Fun? Well, I don't know about fun, but next month I have foolishly overcommitted. So I have a conference my publisher's doing the first weekend in June. It's called MoonCon 21.
Cool.
It should be fun, yeah. And then there's an event called the Morrigan's Call Retreat. I've actually done it every year since the first year. It's when it started, which I think was 2012. It's been so long, honestly, I do not remember. But that's the second weekend in June, and I'm doing classes in that specifically about Irish paganism. And then the third weekend in June, I'm in another event called Free Spirit Gathering, and I'm teaching about fairies in that one.
Nice.
So
there's a lot coming up.
I have no sense of proportion, I think, is the moral of this. So
note to self, don't overbook again.
I say that to myself every year. I'm like, I'm going to do less this year. I'm going to scale back. never happens.
No,
So
but that's good. That means, people really take an interest and want to learn more. How can they get your books? Where can they find them?
My books are on Amazon, and I know some people hate Amazon with a passion, Evil Empire and all that. So you can also find a lot of them on Barnes and Noble, and most brick and mortar bookstores. If you ask for them, they can get the book because they are distributed in North America. And I should add, I am teaching a class this Sunday about changelings.
I almost forgot
about that. Fun changelings,
Yep.
Love
the Irish pagan school. Yeah, that's an intense subject. I have like a million content warnings on that class, which I've never done with a class I've taught before. But
we should y'all need to brace yourself. Do a show just on changelings.
Yeah, it is. You definitely could do an entire show about it.
You into it?
It's a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we do that? I
love changelings.
I think maybe we should book you for Spooky Month in October.
Well, you're obviously booked in June, so
talk about spooky changelings. Right.
Yes, as we've established, I'm a little busy next month.
I love that.
Yes. Yeah, we only have like maybe a couple of dates per month left till the end of the year. So
that's good though. So you guys are keeping busy too.
People just message and like to do the show. All right.
It's horrible because now
let me see. It might be into 2022 pretty soon. But that's happy to have you on board. I know.
Sure. It's like, can you book in January? Because that's where we're at.
That's pretty much where we're going. That's wide open January next year. So, but
I can't believe we're already in 2022. Like that.
We will be.
That blows my mind.
We're getting there. But you know what? I'm truly honored. I'm glad that people love us enough to not only want to listen, but to want to return and to want to, join us for like the first time. And it's definitely been a great journey. And of course, love having you on. Always a pleasure.
This was fun. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I always try to be laid back and have a good time, have a few laughs. And, so thank you again for joining us. And I will be in touch and we'll do this again.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Morgan. It was such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Morgan. So we have come to another awesome segment here on the Outer Realm. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Big thank you to Morgan Daimler. Always a pleasure, wealth of information and a whole lot of fun. And of course, thank you, Joe, for being behind the scenes and messing with the whole freaking StreamYard program. Always appreciate that. So please remember to stop by the United Public Radio website, UFO Paranormal Radio, YouTube, UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials. And please, I'm sure we're going to be having the new International Public Radio. I got to get used to that coming up soon. Also, stop it. I see you. So while you're at it, head on over and show us some love at the Outer Realm and over on Instagram. If you want to message us, please do so at, of course, the Outer Realm Contact at gmail.com. The Outer Realm Contact at gmail.com. If you'd like to see a guest or topic, or if you'd like to, be a guest on the show, it does take a while to get back to you, but I promise I eventually do. So join us tomorrow night. And our problem child and producer, Joe Montaldo, will be joining us. So we're going to be talking UFO stuff. And he's like the best out there. So it'll be a whole lot of fun. So